Welcome, everybody, to Lunar Alchemy this week. My name is John. I'm here with Bella. So happy to be here to discuss the shadow of reaction and gene key 49. This particular gene key has a unique role in our experience. I sort of like to think of it as the shadow of murder. kind of an awful truth embedded in this one, but it served an important purpose for us evolutionarily as our species has come together in tribal forms and has been able to provide for our own survival through the way that we hunt for food, or at one point hunted for food. So anyways, I'm excited to get into this discussion because even the word reaction is at the heart of almost every opportunity for evolution in relationship with others. Are you responding to your partner, or are you reacting to your partner? And so, as much as there's a deep ancient aspect to this particular gene going on, there's certainly one that is very, very present for everyone today. And I'm happy to I guess, finally get to this one to kind of get to the bottom of it, because, and hopefully we'll get into this, I think it plays a huge role in how we experience so many aspects of our entire gene keys and hologenetic profile. So here we are with the 49, the shadow of reaction that leads to revolution and finally to a city of rebirth. Bella, what are your thoughts on this shadow, and what have you been thinking about as this transit began? Where's your focus been drawn to?
It hasn't been easy, and I feel like it has been tricky for many of us. A lot of things are going on astrologically, and I feel like we can be triggered in the places where we're usually triggered, but maybe there is something that is even like a bit of unknown that we are meeting. At least that has been my experience. And also, if I think with whom I've been working this week, that has also been like going to places where we haven't been before. And then it's actually really cool because we don't have a preferred way of reacting or responding, because you are in completely new territory. And that is what I feel for the 49. And now I'm not speaking about the shadow, but really in the higher frequency, it goes to the new territory. And these are the people that are going to make revolutions in the world. And the other thing that I have thought about this week is that I have a very strong resonance with the 49, the programming partner 4. And what I was thinking this week was, because I am the cross of the Sphinx. In my activation sequence, I have 2 and 1, 7 and 13. And the other cross that you can have if you have the 2 and the 1 is the 4 and the 49. So I think that they are like siblings or something. So a lot of people in my life I resonate with, because maybe we have the same lives work and evolution in their radiance and purpose. They have the 4 and the 49. For me, there is something special because I feel that resonance with these beings. And what I do feel with that cross is that for the Sphinx, we have a direction and we have like an idealism that is very strong. But when we look at the 49, because it's more tribal, like they are more like the revolutionary and the fighters. And for us, it's collective, like it's more about, okay, where is humanity going? It feels like a more peaceful, logical way of going there. And then you go to the 49, where they went into this that is just very emotional. So the way of doing it is louder and it's more courageous. But there is a resonance, but it's also like the way of doing it is different. And I love the courage in those 49s that are, working at a gift level in the world.
Yeah, it's such this gene key. I love that you went that direction. When I was considering what's going on here, my sense, my intuition guided me directly to this thought where it's like, wow, the gene keys are such a peaceful and gentle way of engaging with our evolutionary process. And here we are with gene key 49, and it's expressed in that same gentle, almost soft way of looking at it. But if you really think about the energy that's held or experienced from this particular gene key, it's like the most rageful, like wild, crazy, energetic experience, because reaction is like, yeah, reaction is just like, it's this force of energy that moves through our system that truly takes us over completely. It suddenly grabs hold of all of our thinking. It gives us this deep desire to act out whatever it is that we think is going to resolve this feeling that's inside us. And as I was reading this gene key, I was thinking so much about what it must have been like to live in a time of human society where ideas like "thou shalt not kill" were somehow revolutionary. There's kind of an esoteric story that Moses was actually received a higher frequency form of deliverance, but when he came to the people, recognized their capacity to receive and process and integrate this higher frequency. And because it didn't exist, he kind of destroyed what he received and created what we now call the 10 Commandments. Anyways, "thou shalt not kill" is one of the most famous of those. And here we are with the 49, looking at why is it even necessary for that to be said? Because in our kind of stage of evolution today, it's a given. We've integrated that way of relating with others in our society to some degree. Because of course, humanity's still killing each other at incredibly high levels when you compare it to the potential that, Bella, you're talking about, that lives in this gene key, where we could be in a completely new place of relating, and the only thing that is triggered is a sense of creativity. How do we move forward in this new space? And to me, that's what's really excited about where this particular gene key goes. But to just kind of sit and consider for a moment that inside my own DNA, there lives this sort of intensity of a societal format that existed perhaps a few thousand years ago, where killing your neighbor wasn't such an unthinkable thing. It was more like, oh, did they do something wrong to me? Did they step on my turf? Did they, whatever it was that would trigger that type of a response? It was like, well, why'd you kill him? Well, he stole my chicken, or whatever it was. It sounds outrageous today, but that lives inside us. And just thinking about the intensity of emotion that can come from that, man, it could be scary to face that. So, Bella, how do you see this sort of, I think most people don't quite get to the point of wanting to act out killing somebody because of some sort of trespass that's occurred. But how do you see this reactive nature? What's happening inside us, and what are we doing about it to transform it into something new? How is it that people are able to get into this potential more? You know, is this a mental activity? Is this an emotional activity? Is this like just holding your tongue and stopping yourself, like preventing yourself from going wild? What's going on here?
The 49 is a lot about principles and values, and it's actually tribal. So it's going to have learned those principles and values somewhere, and usually where it grew up, the family or the culture, that more the tribe. So it's something that's been learned by kind of touch and how people in the close vicinity are interacting. So there are dynamics and principles from there. And the thing is, those principles are not absolute truth. But we know, like, if we did things in a certain way in our family, then we go out in the world and we think that everybody's doing that, maybe. Or when we see that they don't do it, that's when we're like, oh, there's something wrong here. You're doing that way. And I have said it before, because I grew up in Sweden, but also in Spain. When my parents sometimes sent me to Spain to be with my cousins, there were things that were completely done in the different ways. And I've said that many times, like in Sweden, I just was sleeping in a big t-shirt and no underwear. And in Spain, it was so hot in the summer, so you don't have any clothes, but you do have your underwear. That's really important, And it's like, it was completely opposite. So for me, from very early, I understood that there aren't any principles that are like overall principles, and they're even like not a value. Yeah, I understood that my aunts thought it was weird that I didn't want to have underwear. That like was a weird thing in a Catholic country. But so what I believe is, when we hold other people responsible for fulfilling our principles, that's when the whole thing is happening. And I remember when I did a video about this 2 years ago, when I was like speaking a little snippet about all the gene keys, I remembered the word entitlement felt important for this gene key, because it's almost like I'm entitled to you treating me in a certain way or doing something for me the way that my principles are. And that's like, that can only end in something that doesn't work, because we're different and we have different principles. And I think that, like, yeah, your question, if it's mental and if it's emotional, that's the thing. So it is something that we are thinking that that's the way it should be. It's our principle, they're mental, but the reaction, it's like, what, how can you do this or not do this, my way? And then it becomes emotional, and then it's like this kind of shock. So, I also know that Caitlin Purvu, he wrote something about the 49, and he said reaction is inevitable. Like, and there's something with that thing that you feel in you when you're expecting something, or when you feel entitled to something, and then it, you can even see it on television when somebody really thinks they are going to, and what is it called? The music awards. They think they're going to win the award, and they sit there, and you have the camera and all the artists, and then you can see in their faces if they thought we're going to be, when they don't, there is a reaction. Like, there is inevitable to not have it. But the question is, what do you do with that reaction? That's the question. And I can see that even in things like, I'm organized, I'm Swedish, we don't have shoes in the house and things like that in Sweden. And there are things like, if I say it once and somebody still doesn't take off their shoes in my house, I'm like, for me, that's a big thing. But how, knowing that here it's normal to have shoes in, like, do I really want to use my precious energy getting really upset about the shoes the second or the third time? Or can I see that we grew up with different principles, and that there is something here where, it's a win-win if I don't freak out about the shoes?
Yeah. So this idea of making the other responsible for fulfilling our principles, I feel like you really hit something on the head there, because the situation that you're describing, it's fantastic. I didn't actually know that about Swedish culture, about not having shoes in the home. So let's say you've asked someone, and they absentmindedly, or inattentively don't follow through, right? Now you have this aspect of relationship where, yes, perhaps if you don't allow your reaction to boil over to sort of poison the moment, so to speak, to bubble up into anger or whatever. This is what most people do. And at the Academy Awards or whatever, what happens? The people that were expecting to win and don't win, and they feel entitled to have won, the reaction that you're seeing on their face is the repressive reaction, or their attempt at repression, right? They're not standing up and like going, like making a horrible face and screaming and all that sort of stuff, which is another aspect of our history where I think about the history of theater and how particularly in European, the history of Europe's theater at the Globe, where Shakespeare was having his plays on, there was the grounds in front of the stage, and it was where the cheapest tickets were, and all the sort of peasantry would come in, and they would bring food to throw at the actors if they didn't like what happened, and they would scream and shout at the stage. This is sort of conjecture, of course, but historical conjecture. Anyways, at one point, if the Academy Awards were happening in human history around those times, the reaction from the actors that didn't win would be completely different. And the crowd too. Everybody today, they cheer and they applaud and they're polite. But even as early as 100 years ago, if you went to the symphony, the Rite of Spring is a famous example. Stravinsky's debut around 1912 or 13 or sometime around then, it supposedly started a riot. The crowd didn't like the music, and they all stood up and like started brawling, and it came out into the streets, and like it was a huge, eventually it became an important deal for Stravinsky. But this way of reacting, this sort of polite version that we have going on today of saying, okay, I asked this person to take their shoes off and they haven't. I'm gonna keep my emotions under control. And when I'm thinking about this, you may be capable of having your feeling and releasing it fully from your system. But I think that most of humanity is still in a stage where they're in a process of emotional management that isn't emotional transmutation, which is a completely different thing. If we're stopping ourselves, we're repressing the reaction is still creating a vibration inside our bodies, and that vibration must be dealt with in one form or another, because it doesn't stop vibrating until it has left our system or has been transmuted into a vibration that can be outside of us. And this can happen in a number of different ways, but when you're focusing on principles like saying, I value taking the shoes off before coming in the home for whatever the reasons are, and either that principle has to be completely eliminated, or the emotional feeling of the vibration of the reaction has to be fully expressed and released away from holding the other person accountable for creating that feeling inside you. And that's where it gets into relationships, because most of the time people are not going to go through that full process and then particularly in a close relationship, what happens over time is something that we consider to be small and we have a reaction to and we repress, it bubbles under the surface. And then a partner or a person in our life who we have very close relationship will do one little thing, and it's like one little thing too many, and all of a sudden we just explode in anger and unleash all of that reactive energy at them for basically not paying attention to our principles or not valuing them. So I mean, I'm sure, Bella, you've had people walk into your home with their shoes on. I'm wondering if you have places to look. Where do you look to? Because sometimes these, we may say, okay, I'm managing, I'm regulating I feel like this is one of the words that's come up a lot in terms of emotional experience of regulation, like we're gonna control them somehow or other. So what is it that you see? What do you look to for allowing this process to occur?
It's interesting when you look at the repressive and the reactive shadow of this 49. The repressive is inert, so that's like you don't really react, you kind of repress it. And then in the reactive, it's about rejecting. And I also have the core wound of rejection. So I can see that my shadow way of dealing with it would be like, okay, I don't invite anybody to my home anymore because I don't want people to, like, I avoid it. Like, you don't come into my house because you can't take off your shoes. And actually I'm gonna like judge everybody the same. No Americans can take off their shoes. That
Right.
would be the low way. In my case, I think that this is, you kind of spoke a little bit about that. When in a relationship there is no inflammation or infection, I don't think it's so hard. Like I can even laugh at it and say, I'm Swedish and this is really important for me, and I can even make a fun thing. Like I transmute it to kind of laughing about it, or telling you, like I did the story about Spain and being a child with no underwear. There's always a fun way of doing it, because there is no, like you're saying, there's no bubbling inflammation or infection. But what you're saying, when there's a close relationship, like your parents or your partner, like somebody that has done that 57 times, and you're like, then that's the whole thing, when it starts to be like, this person really doesn't care about me. It's like, it's not this person doesn't care about the shoes or about this or that, like this, then it becomes this the thing where it touches other parts and you make it something it isn't. And I think that's where it becomes very challenging. And I think, when you speak about what to do with it, like I don't really like Byron Katie's work. Why? Because it's this thing. It's like, is it true? Is it really true? If this wasn't true, how would I be free? Basically. And I think it's so mental and it's not like really embodied. But, for these kinds of things, I think sometimes it's like to become a little bit real. Am I going, if I was already angry 57 times and now I'm exploding and almost getting a heart attack, is it worth it? Or is it true that this person just doesn't know how to put the socks into the laundry bin or close the toilet thing? Like, it's those stupid things that we take them as personal, dishonor against us, when actually it might be laziness. And then the question is, do I want to live with somebody who's lazy, or is that a no for me? So I think it is also for yourself about clear boundaries. What's a yes and what's a no? Because you can forever be unhappy in a family, in a relationship, if you expect people to live up to your principles and already 57 times they didn't. So I think it's about kind of going to the real thing of it. And that's that would probably be the logical way that I would deal with it.
Yeah. So, to me, that really gives us some insight into how does this particular gene key, the 49, really start to show us what's going on in the rest of the gene keys that we have in our experience. For instance, I have the 17 and the 18 as my nodes. And that means that I experience reaction through judgment and opinion. anytime somebody around me does something that generates in me a judgment about, generally around efficiency and other forms of, you know, irrelevant principles that I have, you know, it creates a reaction inside me. So to me, that's how I experience this particular gene key in a lot of ways, is through the 17 and the 18, kind of as a little trigger. So how do we deal with that? Do we the mental gymnastics, of course, you were talking about the work of Byron Katie, which, you know, I don't disagree with you that when you engage with that approach, it feels very mental. And part of the reason is because it asks you to not look at the direct experience of the emotion that is happening. And in order for that process to be successful, you still have to process that feeling vibration. Even if you mentally come to the logical answer or the one that produces freedom, your physical body still has to go through a process of creating physical freedom from that vibrational energy that lives inside. So we do the mental gymnastics of saying, like, do I want to respond to this person not taking their shoes off? Do I want to, you know, do I want to say something? Is it worth it? You know, we might think through these things. And
I think the biggest question here what comes through is like, where is there self-rejection? Because somehow it always goes back to how you relate to yourself. So in what way are you rejecting yourself? Are you with somebody who doesn't even care about the details? You know, are you you know, this is the thing, like, where are you still rejecting yourself? Because that is going to end up in emotional turmoil. And then you actually go from disempowered because of what other people don't give you to being empowered in your own way of saying yes to life instead of saying no to life somehow.
Yeah, so rejection for me is at the very basis of where this arises from. And in looking at that, what that takes me to immediately is the core sphere. Not because the core sphere is built from rejection, but because the core sphere is built in a state of unconscious unity. That experience of being fully connected to the mother, physically, emotionally. There's something going on mentally when you're in the womb, but we can't really imagine it because there isn't necessarily language. However, we do know that there is auditory processing happening. So the mental process has begun at some point. So, but upon birthing, interesting that the city of this particular gene key is Rebirth, right? At the moment of birth, the very first thing is rejection that occurs to us, because not only are we suddenly, now if you were blessed to get a water birth, your experience may have been somewhat more gentle. However, most people, at least in the United States today, are born into a relatively non-home-like environment of a hospital. And you come out, they clip the umbilical cord, which is the actual rejection, and you get whisked over and have like this stuff shoved in your nose, and like you're kind of like wiped around, and they do a few things. Now, I do want to say that I have witnessed this recently, and I don't know how widespread or prevalent this is, but I do feel like people operating even in the most standard forms of medicine today are taking great care with this process. When I was born, I remember my mom told me that the doctor would smoke like in the delivery room, you know, and they did all sorts of things. Like they would take the baby away from the mother, stick them in a different room for like hours and hours before bringing them back sometimes. Anyways, sometimes I still feel like we're coming out of the dark ages, but the point is the rejection. The first experience, all we have energetically as a fully activated gene when we're born is this core wound that we are born with. And on top of that core conditioning that happens, what we experience is rejection. So that's kind of like that separation, the separation from which can lead into another part of our system as abandonment. So rejection is kind of like the basic level, and then abandonment, which is why in our experience, I loved your post, Bella. You posted about grief and depression as an experience that happens, grief in the heart area and depression in the solar plexus or sort of area. Likewise, rejection and abandonment happen in very similar places. So the abandonment we experience in our chest, in our heart. In rejection, we experience in our gut. If you've ever had a deep rejection from someone that you were very attached to, you probably felt sick to your stomach, nauseous almost. And it's because of where that energy lives in our body. So, I mean, getting to this point, every reaction that we have in our experience is based on the learning that we have from our family and the methodology essentially that we've developed to handle this experience of rejection or abandonment that happens in our lives. And you know, Bella, when you were talking about having learned it from our parents, it made me think about there's this kind of an American history that particularly came up in the Appalachian Mountains, where there were these familial rivalries, usually neighbors, and they would kind of like do an eye for an eye over a long period of time, to the degree that nobody remembers the original reason for any conflict. You know, it's like, well, a daughter from this family is always strongly conditioned, you can't marry, and you can't go over there, those are bad people, those are evil people. And you know, it's like, it almost, that type of being, it seems almost kind of funny when you look at it from the standpoint of like, oh, there was a rejection or an abandonment that happened at some point in the past, and now that entire family is evil. So that's where I get to at the base of things. And Bella, I'm wondering if you have any ideas about how this gene key might color that core sphere, or how it leads into the conditioning that we get through the SQ and the EQ and the IQ as we develop our personalities and the way that we work in the world.
Yeah, so here we have, just by looking at the words, that direct connection to the fourth line core wound, which is the core wound of rejection. And you were just speaking about where it sits in the body, which is the fourth line. It's also, we can say, the fourth chakra. It's also the heart energy, or the chest, even the breathing energy. So much it's there. And I think it's interesting, even the fact that when we look at the core wound, it also is connected to one of the 7 sacred seals, and each one of the seals is connected to a gene key. And here is gene key 43, the gene key of deafness. So there is something that you're deaf to. You know, when you're stuck in your principles, there's something you're deaf to. And even like you're saying, those families that still have that tribal understanding on who you can touch, who you cannot touch, who can sit around your table, who's evil, you know, that is because you're deaf from something. So I feel like that gene key, the epiphanies that we can have as well when we dare to look into rejection. And for me, I believe that a lot of what I have understood when I have looked at my own core wound in the fourth line is about that self-rejection, that it seems like all rejection stems in the self-rejection.
That really, that really just sounds like a beautiful way to be able to begin the inward journey.
Yeah, and it's a seriousness about life as well. It's like that entitlement come from a seriousness and a kind of like a judgment in a way, like, I'm so when we can live in a lighter way, I feel also that lightness can be a remedy for self-rejection, because self-rejection is also not allowing joy, not allowing beauty, not allowing pleasure, not allowing the peace to happen between me and you, between this tribe and that tribe. And that's the reform, that's the whole, and I know we're speaking more about the shadow in those conversations, but I feel like the leap to the next level is, when you're making changes, are you making them from fear and anger? Because then it's going to happen the same thing with those villages or tribes forever. And the same thing in relationships. If I'm making a reform from fear and anger, the next partner I'm going to have, they're going to look perfect in the beginning, but then it's going to end up the same way. So from where are you making the changes? From where are you making your revolution? Is it a reaction illusion or whatever that could be, or is it a true revolution?
Yeah, so I love this suggestion, because oftentimes we can look at the gene keys and this concept of our destiny through the gene keys, and it can feel like we can't change anything about this. You cannot stop reaction from happening, right? So what do? And I love this way of saying, if you go inward and look at self-rejection, what ways do you seek approval from others? That's another layer on top of it. If you just ask yourself a question like, what do I reject about myself? Well, you may be able to come up with some things that maybe you reject about yourself on the surface, maybe things you don't like about your personality or your appearance or your capability in certain areas of your life. But this comes from something way deeper from any of those things. So how do we access that? How do we get to it? Well, we can also look at, where do I seek approval? Where do I want a person that I look up to? How do I want them to approve of me? What do I want to show them so that I can receive their positive reflection? This might be your romantic partner. This might be someone that you follow, somebody that you look up to, who's kind of like a thought leader or something like that. Who are you looking to for some form of approval? Because that will give you insight into what is being rejected. When in the full absence of self-rejection, approval from others is completely irrelevant. I mean, it's a wonderful thing, but you can recognize that person's approval is just a positive experience for them, and it has nothing to do with you. So when we're going inwards for this, and Bella, I love that you brought up lightness, because next week is the transit for gene key 30, which is the gift of lightness through the shadow of desire. And you know, that's my evolution. So one of the things that I get to work on all the time. So I'm excited about how that goes. So looking at this entire situation, when you start to say, oh, I'm gonna look at how I'm rejecting myself, or where do I seek approval, we can get really serious about it. and kind of down on ourselves, really critical of ourselves for having rejection in our experience. And some lightness in that area really, I think, moves that entire process forward. So Bella, any final thoughts before we move on to the transmission part of our process here?
I mean, I do feel like this is almost like a split in humanity. You know, those of us that are willing to look at this as the core wound it is, where we perpetuate this, like you're saying, over generations as well, whether it's like individually what we learn in our family, we go out in the world, or it's the whole tribe that's still together and perpetuating. So for me, it feels very much like when we can break through or see beyond, or however we want to see this particular one, that's when we find freedom. And that's when we go from, you know, whether we speak about 3D to 5D, or like however we want it, this is the key to ascension. And this key is part of the cordon ring of the whirlwind. So it's connected to that 55, and all the changes that are happening now, even in our DNA and in our society, and you can see it everywhere. Pluto is in the 60th gate, the last gate in the whole wheel. It has to do with containers and limitations, and Capricorn breaking out of those. So for me, this is very much the key that is unlocking that 55 and that gift and the city of freedom. And I feel like we can actually look at this one, and maybe even look at it in each person, in each tribe, in the collective, and see, okay, wherever you're ticking shadow, gift, city, you know, wherever you are, wherever your average is, it's going to say, you know, how easily can you ascend? How easily can you see the new realities we are creating? You are muted, John. You're muted.
Of course I am. Thank you for bringing up the 55. The connections between all of these gene keys are so deep. And of course, the 55 is coming up in a short period as well. And I'm excited about having a chance to look at that as well. So as we move through this process of lunar alchemy, the rising of the moon each day and night, the rising and setting of the sun, it is engaging these energies inside us, whether or not you have the 49 in your profile. I'm certain if you've been listening to our discussion that some part of this has deeply resonated with you. And what that indicates is that this particular energy is being processed on a massive collective level throughout humanity. I think a lot of us have been experiencing some challenges over the last few days, whether it's been energetically or in our relationships or some form, where we're experiencing the density of the presence of lower frequency inside our physical biology. And part of what we're doing in lunar alchemy is to take the opportunity of this vibratory resonance between ourselves and the moon and generate a greater unity between our sense of self and our sense of the other, which is the same as the relationship between our planet Earth and our satellite moon, the self, the Earth, and the other, the moon. When we begin to see the system from a totally holistic standpoint, we open up the doors for higher frequency to come through. And we're doing that through quantum energetic transmissions to allow these frequencies to be processed through us in the best possible way to create those openings to receive and embody the higher frequency. So if you've been watching us on Facebook, thanks for joining us. I posted a link in the comments finally just now. You can click on that link to learn more and join us more deeply if you are interested in receiving the quantum energetic transmissions. In Unlock Your Design, we have more than half of all of our lunar alchemy sessions available on a singular basis, meaning if there's a particular gene key that you would like to see our discussion of and receive a transmission for, that is also available there in Unlock Your Design. If you can't find it, just post a comment for us in the videos. Pretty soon I'll be having a nice link that'll get you everywhere you need to go. So thanks for joining us on Facebook. We'll be back next week to discuss the Shadow of Desire in Gene Key 30, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. We'll continue on with our solar members and the transmission.